Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like it need Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like it need Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Hey.
Blast off on another episode of Hero Paranormal Podcast, broadcasting from the base at La Madre Mountain, just south of Area 51. My name is Ryan, the original outlaw of the airwaves, bringing you an epic episode tonight. This one's coming from across the pond, and by that I mean the UK. It's coming from Europe. We have an extremely knowledgeable guest, not only of Roswell, but of the people who were touched by the event and whose courses in life were changed by the phenomenon. It is really pretty interesting. We have a fairly unique piece of work that we are going to be discussing with our guest. And speaking of fairly unique, I want to thank all of the unique donators and patrons to Hero Paranormal. If you haven't been to heroparanormal.com, please stop by, smash that donate button, and become an insider. Also, you can go to Patreon. That's first place I download as well. So thank you to all the Patreon patrons, and I will keep it coming as long as I can. You guys make it possible. So I appreciate all of you making it possible. And without further ado, let's get to it and give our guest a call. Hello, Tom. How are you doing?
All right.
Good to hear from you, and I'm really excited about talking about this fairly unique piece of work, which I believe delves into the human aspect of the UFO phenomenon more than most. And I wanted to ask you, Tom, first of all, thanks so much for joining. And what motivated you to write the book, and how did it come about?
First of all, are we going to be video or audio?
It is audio only, but video is okay on your end.
Okay. Well, which book are you talking about?
Touched by Roswell, and it just seems fairly unique in that it really kind of delves into the UFO phenomenon from the human perspective instead of just on the UFO phenomenon in Roswell in itself.
Yes. The reason we wrote the book was that in our previous book that came out last year, there was a chapter that I wrote called Touched by Roswell. It was just a chapter in our book. I have it here, not to give it a plug, but Roswell, the Ultimate Cold Case, I wrote a chapter in there called Touched by Roswell. And it went over very well. And so we decided to write an entire book about the people, not the witnesses from 1947, not the people who were there at the time, but people over the years that the names you would recognize, actors and actresses, politicians, famous people that most people would recognize, that somewhere in their life they cross paths with the Roswell, either the city of Roswell or the case itself. Either they knew somebody or somehow it affected them. Somewhere that they were touched by Roswell. So in the book, I don't know if you have a copy of it or not. I don't know.
Yes, and I do, and like you said, it's pretty amazing, and how many people are quite honestly touched by Roswell, just as your book implies, and it's changed the course of their lives.
Yes, we have. I counted them. We have approximately 125 people that we identified in the book that were touched somehow by Roswell. 65 of them we go into great detail. We have the main people that we go in depth about, and then we have another 60 that we just have a sentence or two or three about. So that's how we divided the book up. And I'm looking here how many pages we have. The total book is 241 pages.
Yeah.
So we have people from every walk of life: actors, actresses, singers, songwriters, movie producers, movie directors, politicians. We even have an NFL football player or two that was touched by Roswell. So we even have a prince,
Yes.
the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein in Europe contributed. So everybody's in there.
They really are. And although everyone in the book is extremely important, in my opinion, one of my favorite sections was on Robert Bigelow. And I'm wondering if it is okay if I, just to give listeners an idea, kind of a taste, if it's okay if I read an excerpt from that portion of the book as an example for listeners.
Go for it. It'll save me from talking.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll do it. Robert Bigelow is an interesting character. And this is straight from the book. In 1994, he would privately meet with directors of the three main UFO groups: the Center for UFO Studies, the Mutual UFO Network, and the Fund for UFO Research, with the plan to provide major funding of special projects approved by two representatives from each group. But when Bigelow expressed the desire to have a vote in the appropriation of the money, the three groups balked, and with that lost millions of dollars in potential support. Failing that enterprise, Bigelow created the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS, in 1995, and in Las Vegas, where he was headquartered. 4 years later, he would establish Bigelow Aerospace and would put $1.5 billion into developing the first commercial space station, as well as launching two experimental space modules, Genesis 1 in 2006 and 2 in 2007. In 2007, Bigelow strongly urged his fellow Nevada friend and Senator Harry Reid, co-signed with Daniel Inouye, I believe is how it said, and Ted Stevens.
Inouye, yes, Daniel Inouye from Hawaii.
That's right. Inouye, to initiate the government-sponsored project Advanced Aviation Threat Identification Program, commonly known as ATIP. The larger portion of the funding came from Bigelow and was allocated to the Department of Defense through a contract with his corporation and Defense Intelligence Agency to investigate UFOs under the umbrella of OSAP, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Application Program. So your book really goes into detail about how, it's amazing how the characters in the book, by hook or crook, their lives are changed by the phenomenon and by Roswell indeed.
Yes, Bigelow was up to his eyeballs in UFOs and Roswell, and I can tell you that we've learned since actually the book came out this month. No, I'm sorry, that we're in July. See, I'm losing track of time.
Me too.
It came out last month, June. The book came out. We've learned since June that Bigelow Aerospace is where some of the, and we have this in writing from the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, responded to a FOIA request of one of our associates in writing, and Bigelow Aerospace in Nevada, in addition to what you just said, is housing UFO wreckage that has been recovered, and it is also conducting experiments regarding the wreckage and regarding time compression and all sorts of things that have to do with getting here from there. And so he's up to his eyeballs in the UFO phenomenon, including housing. I don't know if he's got all of the wreckage, but he's got wreckage from UFO recoveries, crashes and things like that. And high-level experimental projects are taking place at Bigelow Aerospace in Nevada. Now, we also understand that he's sold his company. He's no longer running it, but they have all these secret facilities there, and you use your imagination as to what they're doing there. But that's what we have learned since the book came out.
And, I'm going to have to put my hand up in the air and testify to what you're saying to some extent. I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and not that recently, but yeah, I kind of heard the same rumors and mumblings. And
well, it's true.
Yeah.
We've got it in writing from the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and I have a list here of some of the, they came out with this report. They came out with a report a couple weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, the famed Defense Department expose of what they've been doing about UFOs, and it was really underwhelming, as you know. There was a public report, which we got, which said not a whole lot, but there was also a classified version of that report. And we have since learned from my associate, I won't tell you who he is, but he's in the know. The classified portion of the report includes such things, and this is the report that goes to Congress, research in energy pulse propulsion systems, ion propulsion systems, anti-gravity propulsion systems, antimatter propulsion systems, compressed nuclear propulsion systems, advanced use of exotic elements, that would be crash wreckage, for energy research, and it goes on and on. It appears they're trying to compress the speed of light, things like you would be interested in as you're wondering how they get to Earth from so far away. And that's all going on as far as the classified report. Now, we were never told those things, but I have sources, or one main source that is really into that. And Bigelow Aerospace, if you live in Nevada, I've never been there, but I'm told that they've built new facilities without windows, and that Bigelow no longer owns the company or has divested himself somehow. And but research of the nature I just read to you is going on there. Perhaps also at Lockheed Martin in California. I think Harry Reid spoke about UFO materials being at Lockheed Martin.
Yes, and you are 100% correct. It's such an interesting shell game. It's like going to a carnival and you think the bean or whatever is under one shell, and they're constantly moving it around for plausible deniability.
Yes, and they never did stop investigating UFOs. You know that the Project Blue Book was shut down in 1969. Well, that didn't mean the UFOs said, okay, well, let's all go home to our own planet. That UFO reports didn't stop. They kept having sightings, but the Blue Book folded in 69, but they kept investigating under different names. One of them was the ATIP that you mentioned, Advanced Aeronautical Threat Identification Program. and they had other names for them, and but it's never stopped.
No.
But they'd like the public to think, oh, well, we don't investigate those anymore. Call your police department. Oh, yeah, I'm sure they want to investigate,
Right.
So,
and yeah, it's
shell game. It's a shell game.
It is a shell game, and the rapidness with which they move. When I initially moved to Las Vegas, I noticed the first place I went, because I'm a complete nerd when it comes to this, is Bigelow Aerospace. And it is very interesting. They were actually building the building around a structure. And so whatever was there, and they were building the building around it. And I believe that the common belief is that was the Genesis program at the time, but we don't know because this stuff is all under tarps and all kinds of stuff. And what I found really intriguing is, as you said, in more current times, this plausible deniability has gone to an exponential rate where now Bigelow claims to only be investigating consciousness. For all intents and purposes, his northeastern Las Vegas facility is completely shut down. And we're talking about, I've never seen a facility like this. Even, it's got just the, and this is from an insider, but just the HVAC systems are millions of dollars because they can't have any contaminants of any sort from this planet involved in the research they're doing. And, and it's hard to believe that, an area, a building like this, that where someone has spent so much money, is just sitting vacant. However, if you approach the area, the security force is in full effect, and
well, they have to guard those vacant buildings, right?
Exactly.
They have to guard those vacant buildings.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought that up. I'm glad you brought up the possibility of metamaterials, etc. in this theory that we are reciprocating.
We have it in writing, Ryan. We have it in writing from the DIA that there's they call it UAP material there, and because they don't like the term UFO, they call it UAP material, and they're doing high-level research on it, and we have it in writing, and there's no doubt about it. They're trying to claim, oh well, it's we're always looking for new alloys, and that's baloney, because the Freedom of Information request specifically mentioned UFO material. Not UAP, but UFO material, and that's what they were responding to, even though they called it UAP. And they're trying to backtrack now, like, oh no, we didn't know what we had, blah 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 blah. It's too late. The horse is out of the barn. You can't put it back in, no matter what they say.
I agree, totally, 100% agree, and. Another very interesting thing is, as you said, this whole UFO to UAP change, because some of the documentation prior to the UAP switchover all says UFO, things like the Wilson documents, which many people have swept under the rug. And for those who are unaware of the Wilson, I don't want to go too deep into it, but or stay on one subject.
Neither do I.
But the Wilson documents are saying everything you are saying. It is basically the breadcrumbs, if you will, to this possibility of metamaterials and an actual fully working craft, from what I understand, housed somewhere.
Well, I have, to be honest with you, I've forgotten all about the Wilson thing, so I can't respond to that. That's been a couple of years ago.
Right.
And it was back and forth whether it was legitimate or not, and I've forgotten all about that. So.
And everybody has. It's not just you. I had too. And it's one of those things, I think it was quickly debunked, as these things often are, by, quote unquote, people who know. And that was that. Moving on, but it's so fascinating how these things are quickly debunked, and then 10 years later they pop up. I wanted to ask you also a quote in the book, which I was fascinated by the Shirley MacLaine section, and I love the quote: "I believe in UFOs, I believe in extraterrestrials, and I believe in angels, and maybe they'll protect all of us." That was so epic.
Well, Shirley MacLaine interviewed Don Schmidt and myself. This was after our second book, Witness to Roswell, second edition, came out in 2009. So she wanted to interview us because, as you know, she's had sightings of her own, and she's into channeling and mysticism and that sort of thing. And I had the distinct feeling that we were not far out enough for her. You know what I mean? Don Schmidt and I are like a nuts and bolts type investigators. Give us the facts, ma'am. That's all we're interested in. And I felt that we were not far out enough for her. But she told us that she had, after Jimmy Carter left the presidency, she had an occasion to meet with him, and she asked him about UFOs. And Carter replied to her that he said, "We do have UFO material in hand, but he can't state it publicly."
Wow.
So in that respect, and he had to be talking about Roswell, certainly. And so that's why she's in the book, because she did interview. She requested to be interview us, and then she told us that story about Jimmy Carter. And there was another story, I forget who told it. It's in the book somewhere, and I forget who gave us a story that Jimmy Carter, when he was president, he wanted to know about what the government had on UFOs, and somebody came in and said, "Well, you don't have a real need to know, Mr. President." And when the meeting was over, our source said Jimmy Carter was sitting there with a faraway look, almost in tears at what he had heard. We suspect he heard something that he could not divulge, like, "Hey, Mr. President, we do have this stuff, we have that, but we can't clue you in on it because you don't have the need to know." But he got enough information that he was very upset at what he had heard.
And I believe that 100% with Jimmy Carter. It is one of those cases in history where, I mean, we had he seemed to be a president who was just blown away by the subject. And I think he had his own sighting. And it appears in reading the account of it, it was a very good sighting where he was about to go give a speech somewhere, give a talk somewhere, and he was standing outside the venue. And this light in the sky, it was getting near dusk. It was not dark outside. It was getting near dusk, and this light approached them and headed right for them, and then just hovered over a nearby tree. And everybody's standing there looking at that. And then it flew off at great speed. So it was a fairly close sighting. With a number of people were with him, and he filed an official report. I don't know if it was with MUFON or NICAP or NAPRO or whatever, but he did file an official report that is on file somewhere, and it was a good sighting that he had. So that's probably why when he became president, he wanted to know, well, what do you have on this? And somebody mentioned something that really upset him, and he was very distraught when our source left the room. Yes, I don't doubt that for a minute. And what I like about the approach of your book is you delve into each individual deeply, but also with reverence because of the subject matter. and whether it is like you mentioned, Jimmy Carter, and I mean, a personal sighting, that's a pretty big deal for a president. You go into detail where other people have kind of skimmed over. There's a lot of subject matter that people don't know that is in your book. For example, in the Bigelow section, you delve into Rod, who was a great kid. But at the same time, it's an area that people don't delve into. And that's Robert Bigelow's son who succumbed to addiction. And there's other interesting things that your book, just every single section. I want to get into the Marcel section, but I have to delve into the Ozzy Osbourne section because...
Oh, don't do that, 'cause I didn't write that chapter. So
oh, darn.
If you want to say something about it, go ahead. But I can't comment on that chapter because I didn't write it.
No worries. And just to clarify to listeners, we do have only one of the authors of the book. It's a great book. There are two authors to the book, but I have to dive into this section because Ozzy Osbourne, his son is a friend of mine. And you interestingly went into, I'll just read it really quick if that's okay. Legendary British heavy metal artist and former lead performer with the group Black Sabbath was a total skeptic on the subject of UFOs. That is until his visit to Roswell in 2015. For years, whenever the performer returned to his home in Los Angeles from touring around the world, he would bring books home to his son Jack. Often they were UFO books, and on one occasion they included the author's best-selling tome, Witness to Roswell, which I think many have read. So when Jack was first diagnosed with a severe form of multiple sclerosis in 2012, he proceeded to make out his bucket list, quote unquote, of the things he still wanted to see and do while the disease would allow. Now, where this is it touches me deeply, Tom, because I'm a friend of Jack's, and I was actually with him in 2012 when when he felt the, I guess, symptoms of multiple sclerosis. And the interesting thing is, he was on Skinwalker Ridge with myself and some other individuals. And so we were in an area that is very UFO related. So I think everything in the book is so well documented. I just, hands down, you guys nailed it. I mean, even in areas that I found personal, I was like, wow, these guys nailed it. Really cool stuff.
Yes. Yeah, Don wrote half the chapters and I wrote half the chapters. And Don wrote the Ozzy Osbourne one. And he actually wrote the Bigelow one as well. But I did know a few things about Bigelow that I learned after the book was published, and that's what I discussed with you. But we have Elvis Presley in there. Everybody's heard of Elvis. And
yeah.
I wrote that chapter. And it was very interesting. What happened was Elvis had his own personal jet. He had his own Lockheed Electra personal jet. Mm-hmm. It was red. It was had velvet inside. I mean, we were down at Roswell. The air base, the old air base, is still there.
Amazing.
And we wanted to go out onto the base where they had loaded up the aliens. They had the aliens in a large wooden crate. And we wanted to go to the spot where they had actually loaded that crate into a waiting B-29. Okay? Mm-hmm. It was the old, what they called bomb pit number one. It was a large bomb pit where they would put in atomic bombs because it was an atomic bomb base, the only one in the world at the time. And so we went to that spot. It's now just like a cemented over cul-de-sac. It's a cemented over area. And so we got permission to go out onto the tarmac to take the photos. So I took the photos of where the bomb pit was, and I didn't know it at the time, but in one of the photos I took, you could see this red Lockheed Electra aircraft parked close to this where the bomb pit was.
No way.
So when we're leaving, we said, hey, let's go over and take a look at that airplane. That looks pretty neat. And so we get over there and we said, oh, this must have been the airplane of somebody famous. And it turned out that it was Elvis's personal airplane, and it had been sitting there for 35 years.
Right.
And it was sold in 2017 it was sold for $440,000, but it had sat right next to where the aliens had been loaded into the B-29 to fly out of Roswell. It had sat there for 35 years after Elvis died. So Elvis didn't know it, but he was connected to Roswell.
and you guys actually include an image of this in the book, which I thought was really cool.
Yes. I took the pictures. I took the picture of the aircraft because we thought it was somebody famous that had owned it. And we looked inside, and everything was like plush velvet, red, and you can see the plane itself is red, and it was in pretty good shape. And they sold it for $440,000 a few years ago. But at the time, I didn't know I had a picture of the bomb pit, but you can also see the plane in the distance. Wow. I didn't know, and I said, "Oh my goodness, I got the plane in the distance." And so that's in the book. Both pictures are in the book.
Wow, it's a plane fit for a king, and something we can't brush over, and you mentioned earlier, is the Prince Hans Adam II of Liechtenstein. Can we go into that a little bit? That's so amazing.
Yeah. Prince Hans Adam II is now he is now the head of state in Liechtenstein, and he is the richest head of state in all of Europe, and he's the fourth richest head of state in the world. In 1990, he was very interested in the Roswell case. And he was so interested that he sponsored and funded a meeting of all of the then living first-hand witnesses that we knew of to the 1947 crash. All the ones we knew that were still alive, he brought to Washington, D.C. It must have cost a ton of, he has a ton of money. So he funded this meeting in Washington, and there were 27 first-hand witnesses that we found that he brought to Washington, and he videotaped each one's story, who they were, what they knew, what they saw, what they knew of the case. All 27 he videotaped. They're all dead now. They're all dead.
Wow.
And in 1992, they put it into a video, what do they call it, the VHS. That's back when they had VHS tapes, before the discs.
You bet.
And they called it Recollections of Roswell. And I have a copy of it. I still use it to find out what so-and-so said back then about their experience. And he funded that whole thing. And that was his connection to Roswell. He was very interested in it. And I'm trying to get Don Schmidt, because Don Schmidt knows the ambassador from Liechtenstein in Washington. I said, "Hey, Don,
oh man,
can you get us a trip over there? I'd like to see Liechtenstein. Maybe I want to live there. I don't know." But he did that, and it cost a lot of money. And like I said, all of those witnesses now are dead.
Well, let me know if you need to get somebody to carry your bags when you go over there. I'll definitely do my best.
But it was an amazing thing he did. It was right before I got involved in the case. I got involved in the case in 1991. And this took place in 1990, but it was an amazing thing, because it's like taking somebody's statement for posterity, which is what it is. And there's only one person that is on the tape that's still alive, and she's only alive. I mean, she's only on the tape because she was the granddaughter of the sheriff of Roswell, George Wilcox. She was his granddaughter. She didn't want to go to Washington, so they videotaped her in her Roswell home. So she's still alive. That's the only one that's still alive from all of the ones that they interviewed at that time. So
it just goes to show that with time, a lot of these, time is on the side of those who are writing history. And it seems like with time, a lot of these things can be swept under the rug if you can just keep them on the back burner long enough.
We always said that the government's trying to run out the clock, like a basketball term, or football, trying to run out the clock on Roswell. And as far as the first-hand witnesses goes, as far as I know, they're all gone. We are not aware of any first-hand witnesses that are still alive. Even some of the second-hand, like the children, they're starting to go as well.
Oh my gosh!
And like I said, Barbara Duggar is a granddaughter of the sheriff, and so it's a dwindling. They're running out the clock, and that's why the book that I told you about that came out last year. You see, it says Roswell, the cold case closed. We thought it was going to be our last book, and we've written Touched by Roswell since then, and we have a book coming out next year that we're finishing up right now. It's the third edition of our very first book called Witness to Roswell. We're updating it because next year is the 75th anniversary of the crash.
Wow!
So our publisher wanted to put out a book for next year. So we're doing the very first one in an updated version, and we're just finishing that up now, and it'll be out next year.
Oh, that's exciting. And just for our listeners, you have quite a few books. I would like to just take a minute because I'm going to ask, I want to get this done before because we may not have time at the end. And that is, could you go through a list of the books that you've written on the subject matter?
Yes, as we speak, there's 10 of them. We've written 10 books. The very first one was our bestseller called Witness to Roswell. That came out in 2007. Don Schmidt and I teamed up in 1998, right after the 50th anniversary of the case, because most of the researchers left the field in 1997. They figured, well, there's nothing more to learn. Well, Don and I wanted to continue a proactive investigation of the case, so we teamed up in May of 1998. We're still a team, and we've published 10 books in that time, the first one being Witness to Roswell. It did so well that our publisher wanted a second edition. So in 2009, 2 years later, we did the second edition of Witness to Roswell. We followed that with Inside the Real Area 51.
Great.
Which is Wright-Patterson Air Force Base.
Mm-hmm.
It was a book about Wright-Patterson because that's where, everybody associates Area 51 with aliens, right? I'll give a talk and I'll say, how many people here ever heard of Area 51? And all the hands go up. Well, how many people here have ever heard of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base? And maybe one hand will go. So we came out with a book about Wright-Patterson, which is where all of the Roswell material went. It's where the bodies went right after the crash. It's called Inside the Real Area 51, about Wright-Patterson. So that was the third book. The fourth book, I'm probably going to forget one here somewhere, but the fourth book was The Children of Roswell, and that came out in 2000. I'm sorry. Inside the Real Area 51 came out in 2013. In 2016, we published The Children of Roswell, which was basically about the children of the witnesses, because so many were passing away.
Right.
We wanted to talk about the children. So that's 2016. So I was sort of worn out at that point. I didn't want to write another book right away, but Don Schmidt, he wanted to write another book, so he wrote a book in 2017 called Cover Up at Roswell, which I contributed to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 2017, 2018. I don't think we did anything in 2018, but in 2019 we did the one I just showed you, Roswell, The Ultimate Cold Case.
Yep.
In 2020, we did two books called. Oh, I'm sorry. I mixed that up. In 2019, we did UFO Secrets Inside Wright-Patterson, which was the sequel to the Inside the Real Area 51 book. So in 19, we did UFO Secrets Inside Wright-Patterson. That's 2019. 2020, we did two books. One was Roswell, The Ultimate Cold Case Closed. The other one was a large pictorial called Roswell, The Chronological Pictorial. I got it somewhere here, but it's the timeline of the Roswell case in pictures. It's a big coffee table book. It has the whole case from the time of the crash up to the present in 2020 in pictures. And in 2021, we did this one, Touched by Roswell, and there are your 10 books. Next year's book will be our 11th on Roswell. It will be the updated version of our Witness to Roswell book. I believe that will be our last Roswell book, unless something stupendous happens. But there's our 10 books, and then soon to be next year our 11th book.
Great books, and they all go into they're all. I love how they're all extensions of yourselves, and that you guys really delve into what you want to delve into. And some of this stuff is pretty deep. If it's okay, I wanted to dive into General Wesley K. Clark, because it's hard to not do that.
That's another one that Don Schmidt wrote.
Okay, I'll just read a little portion.
So far you've done on. You've only asked me about ones that Don wrote. So, go ahead.
The Elvis one was amazing. And, it's more just a comment that General Wesley Clark made, which was that, let's see, let me find it here.
Don ran into him in an airport, and, to his credit, he went up and asked General Clark about Roswell. So go ahead.
Yeah, and it kind of goes into kind of all of the government side of it. And the quote is, when you were approached by the general and posed the question, was the military ever debriefed on the subject of UFOs? Clark responded, I heard a bit. In fact, I'm going to be in Roswell, New Mexico tonight. There are things going on. So Roswell, like you mentioned earlier with the Elvis plane, and I've only seen that from the outside. And from the outside, it's absolutely stunning. This complex is beyond anything I ever expected to see in this town. And it's almost more fascinating to look at the government structures in the town, at that south side of town, than it is, the museums and that, because it's a real relic. It's unbelievable how that town is set up.
Whenever I visit the base, the old base is still there. I feel like I'm walking on hallowed or sacred ground. I really do. Every time I visit that base, even though most of the structures are gone from the old base, the barracks and the various buildings. The only structure that's still there, especially the base hospital, that's all gone. But I was able to get pictures of most of those before they were torn down in the 1990s. My first trip there was like 1993, and most of those structures were still there. So I just snapped pictures of everything, and the only structure that's still left from the old base that was involved is the big base hangar. It's now Building 84, but it was Hangar P3 in 1947. That's still there. That's still a functioning hangar. I've got pictures of that inside in the room where we think the bodies were kept and all that sort of stuff. But everything else has been torn down. The guest house where Mac Brazel was sequestered for a week, where they got him to change his story. That was the last structure that it was still there as far as just a few years ago, but it's gone now.
Is it?
And even out at the crash site, where the so-called Hines house, which was an old bunkhouse, where Jesse Marcel, Sheridan Cabot, and Mac Brazel stayed overnight before they went to the debris field to view the wreckage. That house stayed there until last year when they tore it down. But I got pictures of it inside and outside. So those are all in all of our books. And unfortunately, if you go to there's actually new owners of the land now. They won't allow you on the land to see these, the old crash site. And but you never know. That's why, I love history, and whenever I'm in the presence of something historical, I take pictures. And it's, they're in all of our books, but unfortunately, most of them are gone now.
The pictures in the book are something else that I thought was really intriguing, and the ones that you chose to put in the book, and some of the people you chose to put in the book, because there's so many. And for example, Dwight Yoakam. That was a surprise to me.
Yes, Dwight Yoakam. I think I wrote that chapter. I'm a big country music fan. And Dwight Yoakam, the Bakersfield sound. He is that's his music style, the Bakersfield sound, along with his one of my favorites, Buck Owens. He played Mac Brazel in the movie Roswell, the 1994 movie Roswell. He played Mac Brazel.
Great movie.
And he did a good job at it. And he's remained friends with Don Schmidt over the years. And we have him a nice write-up of... I did that chapter, and because I'm a big country music fan, and so I wanted to do it. And his brush with Roswell was that he played Mac Brazel in the movie. So.
And there's a lot of interesting Dan Aykroyd and David Aykroyd. I don't know if we have time, but I think they were both worth mentioning, even though they are not related. And that's the first thing I assumed as well when I read, is that they were related.
Yes.
But could we go into David and Dan?
The more famous one is Dan Aykroyd, because he's friends with what is it? I have to look. I have to look at it. He's friends with Bill Murray, the actor, comedian, and sort of both iconoclastic. And the thing about Dan Aykroyd is he's very interested in UFOs. And he did a whole show, I have to look at it, called Dan Aykroyd Unplugged UFOs. Big TV special, and it's on disc.
Great show.
And he mentions Roswell, and that's his sort of avocation, is he's really into UFOs, and of course Roswell. David Aykroyd was most people don't recall that he was a host of a TV show, many TV shows, I guess, and he did one of the first specials about Roswell. I believe the first special about Roswell was done by Leonard Nimoy. Remember him from Dr. Spock? He played Dr. Spock.
Of course, of course.
And Leonard Nimoy in 1980 did the first TV special about Roswell. It was if I recall, it was a half-hour show. He interviewed a still living Jesse Marcel out at the crash site. And this is the same year that the book, The Roswell Incident, came out, 1980. And there was a movie that came out in 1980 called Hangar 18, about the famous hangar at Wright-Patterson.
Mm-hmm.
And then the interview with Jesse Marcel out at the old crash site. And that was done by Leonard Nimoy. But David Aykroyd also did a special about Roswell. He hosted many shows, and that was his touch with Roswell, is that he did a special on it.
It's pretty neat how everybody who has kind of come into contact with the idea has ended up doing something great, and everyone listed in the book. And
another one.
Mm-hmm.
You remember Mike Farrell, right? Mike Farrell played B.J. Hunnicutt in the famous TV series MASH.
Mm-hmm.
He played B.J. Hunnicutt, a surgeon. But he was in 1988. He hosted a 3-hour live show about it was called UFOs Live. A 3-hour special on UFOs. It was carried live on TV. I remember I saw it. And he introduced Stanton Friedman, William Moore, and Jesse Marcel Jr., the three of them, and about Roswell on that show. He did a good job. He also introduced, with their faces blocked out, one fellow named, his code name was Falcon,
mm-hmm.
and the other one was Condor. They were two behind-the-scenes secret agent types, and they did a good show. But that was his contact with Roswell, as he had all three of them, or five of them, on his special about UFOs Live in 1988.
And to give listeners an idea of the contents and just how many people are listed, I'm going to run through it really quick. And it's David Aykroyd, Dan Aykroyd, Prince of Liechtenstein, Adrienne Barbeau, Xander Berkeley, Robert Bigelow, Dr. Werner von Braun, which you could do a whole podcast about, Tom Brookshire, Chris Carter, President Jimmy Carter, General Wesley K. Clark, President Bill Clinton, Congressman Merrill Klook, he's from Utah, and I'm aware of how interesting that is, Gordon Cooper, Dennis Crosby, Dick D. Amato, Ted Danson, which was a surprise. And the list goes on, and these are all celebrity status individuals, and it's almost little-known information.
Yes, Ted Danson was an interesting one. Everybody knows him from Cheers, the bartender Sam Malone from Cheers, plus other movies he's done. But I think he's best known for his bartender role at Cheers. But his father, Ned Danson, was a Harvard archaeologist, and certainly most people don't know that, but his father was an archaeologist from Harvard University, and he was in New Mexico in the summer of 1947. And so I thought, oh my goodness, he's out there, and we're in New Mexico. So I think so. What I did is I wrote a letter, because I didn't know where they lived, So I wrote a letter to Ted Danson, care of the MASH show, wherever that was. I'm sorry, the Cheers show.
Yeah.
Wherever that was being filmed, and it ultimately got to Ted Danson, and he gave it to his father, because it was his father I was interested in. So I got a letter back from his father saying, yes, I was, he was out there in 1947, partly in Arizona and partly in New Mexico, but that he was unaware of any, a UFO crash. And so the other reason being, at the time, we thought that there was part of the crash took place on the plains of San Augustine, which was near Socorro, not near Roswell or Corona. And the story was that I read in an archaeology magazine or journal that his team from Harvard got to the plains of San Augustine in 1947, that summer. And we're thinking, oh my goodness, that's where part of the crash. Well, he assured me that nothing took place that summer on the plains of San Augustine, which helped us actually remove the plains of San Augustine from the Roswell story. And also, Ted Danson himself, we understand, was interested in playing the part of Mac Brazel in the movie Roswell that Dwight Yoakam played the part. I'm sorry, I take that back. He wanted to play the part of Jesse Marcel. I'm sorry. Ted Danson wanted to play the part of Jesse Marcel.
What an interesting twist. Yeah,
and they ultimately, Kyle MacLachlan got that part. So, it's amazing the people that were touched in some way by Roswell.
And the synchronicities are just like you mentioned, his father being there doing an archaeological dig, and then him wanting to play the part. It's just very interesting, the synchronicities that take place. And Tom, before we don't have enough time, I wanted to definitely make sure that our listeners can get your book and where they can get your book, and if you could explain where they can best keep up with your work.
Well, you can get the book certainly at Amazon. That's the main seller, and at Barnes & Noble online. Those are the big, that's where most people get their books now. Our website, unfortunately at the moment, is down. We don't know why. I'll give you the address for it. It's www.roswellinvestigator.com. That's all one word, www.roswellinvestigator.com. Now, we've had the site for 20 years, but we've found out recently that it's down for some reason. We're trying to get it back online. We don't know why they took it down, because we're paid up, of course. So our site has all kinds of information. It also has all of our books that if you're interested in buying one when it comes back up, just click on the book and it'll take you right to Amazon. So that's the main focal point for Don Schmidt and myself.
Great. And I appreciate you sharing that. And I appreciate you spending some time with us today, explaining this amazing book and also the other books that you've written, and how the UFO phenomenon has not only delved into people's lives, but kind of, in a way, actuated certain behaviors, activities, and paths in their lives that would otherwise not be the case. And I just think it's a real heck of a work, a very, very interesting work, not your typical book, and something that everybody should have on the shelf.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, it's a different Roswell book. It's not like, here's what happened today and here's where they did. No, it's about famous people.
Mm-hmm.
That, somewhere along the dusty trail of life, they crossed paths with Roswell.
And there's so many of them. It's just fascinating. And the synchronicities, like we mentioned before, when people start to go into the fray of this UFO, or I guess now they call it UAP, I mean, you really kind of have to be wide-eyed, because there's a lot to be said in just the lives of the individuals who become touched, as the book is really, I love the title, Touched by Roswell. If everybody has a chance, definitely check that out on Amazon, or I believe you said Barnes & Noble. And I can't thank you enough for coming on, Tom. I hope to talk to you again.
It's been my pleasure, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
Epic guest. What a great episode, and I appreciate everybody listening in. If you haven't gone to Hero Paranormal, check it out. Also, check out Hero Paranormal on Patreon, and I guess we're on social media at Facebook, so that is what it is. And until next time, guys, you know what to do. Keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off.